She didn't dress like an executive. She didn't walk in like someone important. And for 4 weeks straight, they treated her like a shadow until the day she stood up and her husband walked into the room with the authority to fire every single one of them. This isn't a fictional story. It's a lesson anyone who's ever worked in an office needs to hear. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Alive Stories. Today's story is about a simple woman humiliated at work. Then her billionaire husband walked in and fired everyone. Let's get started. 29th floor, Monday, 10:04 a.m. The conference room was encased in double-glazed glass. Sunlight from the surrounding skyscrapers cast a cold, metallic sheen across the 10-meter table. And in that space, laughter rang out, tight, sharp, and united. Claire sat at the edge of the table, just outside the screen's line of sight. In her hands was a printed data analysis, regular office paper, a few red pen markings. Her hair was tied back with a worn elastic band, gray cardigan, no badge, no signature style. Claire, a female voice called from the head of the table, sweet as honey, but laced with something calculated. Emma Klein, project director and the unofficial orchestrator of every breath in that room, tilted her head. We appreciate your effort, Claire, but maybe it's best if the more strategic voices lead this. A pause, then laughter. Not loud, but enough to etch itself in. Claire didn't argue. She gently laid the paper flat before her, folded it in half, and tucked her pen into her sleeve like muscle memory. She simply said, I ran the model twice. Margin of error is under 0.3. Emma laughed, not needing to hear more. Still, your format feels a little dated. It's giving high school econ. Maybe let Nathan present the projections. Nathan, seated right next to Claire, raised his laptop with a smug grin. He turned the screen toward Emma like he'd just been called on stage. The projector lit up with a glossy slide deck, pie charts, gradients, and the bold phrase, Agile Disruption Strategy. Claire said nothing more. She slid her chair back just a few inches, like pulling herself out of a game she was never really invited to play. 10:26 a.m. The meeting ended. Chair wheels shuffled, bags zipped, heels clicked on marble floors. Claire gathered her papers more slowly than the rest of the room. She waited until everyone left before heading toward the door. Near the water dispenser stood a group of three: Nathan, a new intern named Lexi, and an analyst named Jared. Lexi's voice was hushed, but in the quiet vacuum of soundproof glass, it carried, is she, like someone's mom just sitting in for the day? Muffled snickering. Jared shook his head. Nah, HR's been sending in weird temps lately. She probably just wandered into the wrong meeting. Claire wasn't far. She didn't turn. She just stood there for 3 seconds, then slowly pivoted. Her gaze locked on them. Not sharp, not accusing, just presence, unexpected, still, and razor thin like the edge of a paper knife. She walked toward them, step by step, calm like nothing was smoldering behind her. And as she passed Lexi, she paused for half a second, didn't smile, didn't nod, then turned toward all three and said, slowly, clearly, with the measured cadence of an evening news anchor, we'll see who really runs this place. No one replied. No one knew where to look. No one understood why someone like her, dressed like that, standing like that, appearing like that, had just said something so eerily calm. Claire walked away. And in that brief, suspended moment, the only thing that echoed in the glass and steel silence wasn't the data charts or the disruption strategy. It was a warning no one had registered in time. She wasn't like the women they were used to excluding. 1 week earlier, Claire Hale entered Hale Dynamics through the employee entrance at the back. Not because she didn't know the main lobby, she did, but because she'd specifically requested access from this door. No one in the company knew who she truly was, except for one man, Ethan Hale, founder, her husband. He was the one who invited her to take part in the internal culture transformation initiative. But she was the one who laid down the conditions. No title, no status, No privileges. I don't want them pretending to be decent because I carry the Hale name, she told him. I want to know who they really are when they think I'm no one. And so Claire, former tenured statistics professor at a prestigious university, once commanding lecture halls for over a decade, now sat on the 18th floor in the temporary strategy support department, tucked beside the copier and a shelf of outdated binders. She had no nameplate, no ergonomic chair, no MacBook Pro. Instead, she used an old ThinkPad with a crooked keyboard, a charger that only worked at a precise angle. She brought her own water bottle wrapped in canvas that read, "Numbers don't lie, people do." Every day. She wore neutral cardigans, sometimes gray, sometimes beige, always clean, never expensive. She blended in as if programmed to vanish among fluorescent lights and the endless rhythm of keyboards. And no one asked who she was. Day 2. Someone in accounting mistook her for the office supply courier. Day 3. An intern pointed her to the ground floor lounge for non-staff, said the coffee was free. Day 4, she stepped into the executive elevator by accident. A nearby assistant said gently, "Ma'am, this lift's reserved for executives." Claire just smiled and stepped out. No explanation, but at night, nothing escaped her notice. At the kitchen table, after the kids were asleep, she unfolded a sheet of A4 paper and began writing. By hand, the project team doesn't know the janitor's name. Calls him the janitor guy. Emma interrupted 3 female colleagues in one meeting. No one spoke up. Strategy leads joked about resumes that smell like Walmart. No curses, no complaints, just documentation. As if she were studying something far more dangerous than a system glitch. A culture of quiet dominance. Humming along, undetected. Claire wasn't insecure. She'd once chaired a research council with a 7-figure grant. But she understood this. In a world where power speaks in logos and aesthetics, silence is sometimes the most powerful microscope. So she chose silence, chose to watch those who had no idea they were being watched. Thursday morning. Claire was assigned to assist with a strategic data project. Emma Klein, the manager, didn't even make eye contact when handing her the task, just dropped a stack of documents onto the desk. These are outdated projections. Just clean them up for the meeting. Claire picked up the papers, skimmed them, and instantly spotted methodological flaws. But she said nothing. She opened her old Excel sheet, reran the model, and marked the errors in red. No presentation, no defense. She left the updated report on Emma's desk at 8:02 a.m. the next morning. No one said thank you. That afternoon, around lunch, Claire sat alone in the third-floor lounge. A new security guard approached. "Excuse me, ma'am, this lounge is for corporate partners only." Claire closed her laptop and stood. Polite as ever. "I'm just passing through." She didn't need to prove anything, and the guard had no idea who he was talking to. Claire wasn't lost in this system. She had seen it from the inside and had chosen to step in without a title, to understand exactly why it was rotting. She'd had status and could reclaim it at any moment. But here, in plain clothes and under the label strategic support, she was building a quiet, precise, invisible investigation. No one noticed where she went during her lunch breaks. No one ever read the small notebook in her tote, the one where each line captured truths Ethan would never find in email reports. Claire didn't need photos, didn't need a mic, didn't need performative power. She only needed time and silence long enough for people to reveal themselves. So when they laughed at her spreadsheet on the 29th floor, when they called her someone's mom just sitting in for the day, they didn't realize they weren't mocking a woman out of place. They were standing inside a test they didn't know they were taking. Friday, 8:12 a.m. Claire arrived earlier than usual. The office was still quiet. She set down her canvas tote, filled her water bottle, powered up her machine, and began rechecking the investment risk model. A proposal had been submitted the day before, but something didn't sit right. She didn't see her name listed in the reporting team. And she wasn't surprised. Passing the glass-walled conference room, the door was ajar. Inside, the senior strategy team was in discussion. She heard Emma's voice. "Honestly, the numbers look fine now. Claire cleaned them up. She's quiet, but good with spreadsheets, like someone's auntie who does taxes during the holidays. Laughter followed, not cruel, just the kind of laughter born from never questioning who belongs in the center. Claire stood still, paper coffee cup in hand. Her shoulders didn't move. Only her eyes pulled back, slightly more distant. She knew that kind of laugh. She had once taught the people who laughed like that, graded their work, received their thank you emails after graduation. She had once stood behind a lectern. Now, she stood outside the meeting room like she had never existed. That afternoon, Jake, the mid-level finance manager, stormed into the office with his usual chaos, phone to ear, folders in hand, eyes on nothing, spotting Claire by the printer. He pointed, without breaking his call, "Hey, copy the vendor contracts and drop them in Emma's office. She's prepping for Q4. No, please. No. Could you, no reference to her role?" Claire looked at him for a moment. No anger, no objection. She just nodded, then completed the task, like a test. An invite was sent for the Q4 budget loop meeting. Claire wasn't CC'd. She only found out from a group of interns whispering in the hallway Emma's doing final projections. Nathan's pitching his deck again. Did Claire get invited? Why would she? She's just temp support. Right, Claire didn't ask anyone. She printed her revised model, left it on Emma's desk, and left the office as usual. That evening, Claire sat at her kitchen table, lit by soft yellow light, notebook, fountain pen, and a mug of hot tea in front of her. She wrote mid-level management failing to share information with support roles. Investment strategy based on qualitative guesses, no model testing. How they refer to me, Auntie. Tax lady reveals a system of classification based on surface and social role, not capability. She paused, looked up, silent. How long had it been since someone last called her by her full name? With respect, and without an unspoken label Monday. The Q4 strategy meeting began. Claire was allowed to attend because Jake needed someone to walk through the risk model. But when she entered, no chair was offered. She pulled one from the corner. She sat near the wall, her back to the whiteboard. Nathan opened his slide deck, voice smooth like a radio anchor. As we aim to maximize growth into Q4, our agile disruption strategy hinges on expansion across mid-tier verticals. Claire opened her analysis. No pie charts, no animation, just a risk matrix, projecting cash flow evaporation across untested segments. She raised her hand, no one noticed. Then she spoke. Clear enough to cut through the room. The model you're using assumes linear market response, but mid-tier volatility exceeds 11% month on month. Your margin of error is off by at least 7 points. Nathan glanced at her like she'd interrupted a broadcast. Emma jumped in, sorry. Claire, this isn't a classroom. This is billion-dollar decision-making. This time, the laughter came easily. A bitter wave swept the table like a cold front. Claire set her pen down. She looked at Emma, not angry, not wounded, but like a teacher watching a child argue with the wrong math. Then she said it softly, but every word etched like it was carved in wood. And what will it catch? If you were wrong, the room froze. Not because the question was loud, but because something about it bypassed the hierarchy. A woman with no title, no power, no designation, had asked the question no one else dared to ask. She didn't argue. She made them listen. After the meeting, Claire returned to her desk. Her laptop had been reset. Someone had accidentally logged her out of the internal system. Jake passed by, half distracted. It's cleaning up expired logins. It happens. Claire said nothing. She regained access through tech support, like a guest borrowing the hallway of a house that once was hers. That night, Claire wrote in her notebook, they're not afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being corrected by someone they don't think has the rank to teach them. She underlined the sentence, harder, then closed the notebook. And then, she paused. For the first time in 2 weeks, she didn't write another line. Nothing more needed recording. Because in that moment, Claire knew the audit had gathered enough data, and the results were about to arrive. Claire didn't get angry. She had lived long enough to know anger doesn't change people. It just makes them defensive. She didn't need to be liked. She only needed them to show their true colors, naturally, without provocation, without pressure, and they did, exactly as expected. Wednesday. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m., but Emma showed up late. The whole room waited nearly 15 minutes. Claire sat at the far end of the table, jotting notes in her small notebook. Not numbers, expressions. She watched every eye roll, every glance, every time someone got interrupted simply because they didn't look confident enough. She saw an unspoken evaluation system in place, one not listed in any employee handbook, but operating with ruthless accuracy. Whoever wore an expensive blazer was called sharp. Whoever was silent but good-looking was called focused. But someone like her, simple, outdated, without visual proof of achievement, was considered present but invisible. Mid-meeting, Emma dropped her analysis binder while pulling out her laptop. Papers were scattered across the floor, drifting toward Claire's feet. Claire bent down, gathered them in order, and silently placed them back on the table in front of Emma. No one helped, no one thanked her. But Claire had already seen enough. One of the charts, risk index by market segment, completely omitted the newly launched product line in Asia. That was a $2.1 million blind spot. Claire pointed to the empty section and said gently, "You missed a whole market segment. That's a 2.1 million blind spot." Emma froze. She said nothing, took no notes, made no edits. She just turned to Claire and smiled faintly. "Thanks, Claire. I'll let Nathan double-check it." Claire didn't reply. She knew Emma well, the kind of person who isn't afraid of being wrong, just afraid of being caught wrong by someone without perceived authority. And that smile, light, polite, was the last weapon of someone who's been seen through, but still trying to hold the mask. Lunch. Claire sat alone at the cafe table on the terrace. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, "No correction, only deflection." Avoiding exposure prioritized over actual results, more afraid of being unmasked than facing the consequences of flawed thinking. She wrote like every sentence was a small incision, not meant to hurt others, but to cut away the last bits of hope she still held for this workplace. Afternoon, an intern approached. Trevor, just 2 weeks in. "Hey, Claire, I saw your notes from the last model. Did you used to teach or something?" She looked up, smiled gently. "Once upon a time." Trevor scratched his head. "Your logic's different. It's clean. I tried matching it to Nathan's formula, but yours makes more sense." Claire didn't respond right away. She simply closed her notebook and asked Trevor, "Do you think good work speaks for itself?" He hesitated, then nodded. Claire looked at him, eyes soft but honest sometimes. "Yes, but sometimes it needs someone willing to speak for it." That answer wasn't for Trevor. It was part of her own reckoning. That in this system. Being right wasn't enough. Being seen was what gave truth its weight. End of day. Claire stepped once again into the executive elevator, the same one she'd once been told was not for support staff. No one stopped her this time, but no one greeted her either. She watched the LED numbers climb 8, 12, 17, 29. She realized she was in a layer no one noticed, someone who understood the system but wasn't invited into it. She remembered what Ethan had said during their late-night argument. "Why do you let them talk to you like that? Why don't you just tell them?" In her answer, "Because if I tell them who I am, they'll treat me better. But I want to see how they treat me when they think I'm no one." It wasn't self-punishment. It was Claire's way of testing the world. A world where true power doesn't shout across the table. It waits, silently, for people to show themselves. And then it records. The 29th floor conference room was more crowded than usual that day. An internal bulletin had gone out: Q4 strategy presentation, investment outlook update, with live view from the board. Claire sat at the edge of the table, in her usual spot, same old gray cardigan. She had the same printed report on standard paper in her hands. She said nothing. Everything was so by the book that it no longer surprised her. Slides lit the screen. Ellie shifted hues. And Nathan and Emma exchanged confident smiles like they were about to debut a perfect symphony. And just like always, they didn't invite her to speak. Nathan spoke about breakout opportunities. Emma emphasized index stability, and heads nodded like they'd heard it all a dozen times. Only Claire knew, and had known for days, that those numbers weren't real. Not wrong, but not whole. She knew what had been left out, adjusted, and sweetened to sound good instead of being true. And this time, she didn't intend to stay silent. When Emma started the risk segment, Claire spoke, without raising her hand. Your report omits current energy market data. Real volatility has exceeded 9% for 2 consecutive quarters. If you keep applying a linear model, your error margin will exceed 7 percentage points. A flicker of stunned silence passed over the room. Emma tightened her grip on the remote. Nathan tilted his head, lips pressed thin. Jake was the first to speak. Claire, with all due respect, these numbers have been vetted. You're overstating the error. And frankly, this is a bit much for a forecast. Claire didn't look at him. She continued, calm as if narrating a graph. Forecasts don't exist to validate belief. They exist to prepare for consequences. If you're wrong, stock drops 12% in 6 weeks. If I'm wrong, we lose 3 lines in a spreadsheet. The silence that followed wasn't like before. It wasn't dismissive. It was uncertain. A few people exchanged glances. One department head furrowed his brow. A market analyst adjusted his sleeve. They no longer nodded. They hesitated. Emma kept smiling, but her lips twitched slightly. Let's have Claire's report reviewed by Nathan post-meeting. For now, the door swung open. A man stepped in. No need for introductions. No need for preamble. Ethan Hale. No knock, no invitation. But the entire room fell silent in an instant. Ethan looked around, expression unreadable. In his hand, a slim folder. He hadn't come to greet. He came to an end. He placed the folder on the table, opened it, and said, this is the only report I've trusted in the last 3 weeks. No name needed. Everyone knew who he meant. Emma's face paled. Nathan shifted. Jake tugged at his collar. Ethan turned to Claire. They exchanged a look, quiet, settled, as if the conversation had already ended the night before. Then he looked back at the room. It seems some of you went to great lengths to ignore the only voice still grounded in reason. No one moved. Emma's eye twitched. Nathan closed his laptop. Jake folded his arms, like waiting for a verdict. Ethan circled the table slowly, his voice dropping into something that felt like a verdict itself. You left her off emails, pushed her out of the chair, had her print your decks, fetch your coffee, treated her like an outsider, like auntie with spreadsheets, like a nobody. I heard it all. I read everything, and I counted each act of disrespect in contract days. The air thickened. Someone dropped a pen. Another looked toward HR, who stood frozen by the door. Ethan paused behind Claire. He placed a hand on the back of her chair, not claiming the space, just confirming what the room had denied. She was the center. They were the perimeter. I think it's time this company remembered who's actually protected it over the last month. He turned to Jake. You're suspended indefinitely. Then Nathan, you'll no longer present to shareholders, nor access raw data. Finally, Emma, she stood, shaking slightly, still clinging to her professional smile. Ethan looked at her for a long time. Emma Klein, you'll hand over all active projects today. HR will escort you out of the building. Emma opened her mouth, reaching for a defense. I only did what I thought was best for the company. I didn't know. Ethan didn't let her finish. Exactly. You didn't know. You didn't know who was sitting right in front of you. Didn't know a report could save an entire financial quarter. Didn't know the woman you called someone's mom. He turned to Claire. Is Claire Hale, my wife, co-founder of the Hale Foundation, and the only person in this room who hasn't let ego blind the data. Each sentence landed like a hammer to the moral scaffolding everyone thought they stood on. One investment director whispered, oh my God. Someone froze like they had been hit by lightning. An intern covered her mouth. The woman they had dismissed, mocked, and laughed behind, the one they believed to be nobody, had been holding the future of their careers in silence for 4 weeks. Claire stood, not rushing. She walked to the center of the room, turned to face them, for the first time, standing fully upright. I didn't come here to pretend. I came to listen. I don't need a title to be respected. But respect is the foundation of any system that's meant to last. And today, I've heard enough. She turned to Ethan. No need to ask for permission. He nodded once. Claire continued, I'll be working with HR to restructure internal culture. Not for revenge, but to end a leadership model built on image and entitlement. Because I'm not the only one you've excluded. No one argued, no one dared. There was nothing left to say. The reveal had happened, not through outrage, but through data. Patience and identity revealed exactly when it mattered. After the meeting, Claire didn't return to her office. She didn't need to pack up because, in truth, she'd never brought much there. Just a notebook and her patience. The system had operated exactly as she expected. Not because she was smarter than anyone, but because she had been quiet enough to hear what everyone else was too busy to notice. On the ground floor, a cluster of employees had gathered near the coffee bar. News had spread like wildfire through the core stores. Claire is the CEO's wife. She's the one who wrote the report that saved the quarter. She quietly logged every inappropriate behavior for a month. One of them whispered, I once said she looked like a high school teacher. Another nodded, eyes lowered. I called her the HR auntie. 3 times on the 29th floor. Emma's office door stood wide open. The sight of her hastily shutting her laptop, pulling down her nameplate, and leaving in silence, escorted by an HR assistant, had become a visual footnote to a lesson no MBA course would ever teach. Jake disappeared from the company Slack just hours later. Rumor had it that Nathan submitted a resignation letter to focus on personal projects. No one was publicly humiliated. There was no need. What they now had to face was an accusation. It was a mirror reflecting a truth they had revealed on their own. Ethan offered Claire the position of Chief Culture and Ethics Officer, a newly created role that was placed parallel to the COO. She declined, not because she wasn't qualified, but because she didn't need a title to create change. I'm not here to judge them, she told Ethan. I'm here to recalibrate the ruler. A company can't survive if it knows how to run a business, but forgets how to be human. Instead, Claire proposed a full redesign of the onboarding program, starting with the principle, human value is not tied to role. 1 week later, at a company-wide meeting, Claire stepped up to the podium. No designer suit, no official title, just a woman who had once been denied a seat at the table. Once I was asked to make copies, once called an outsider, and now she was being heard. I don't resent those who dismiss me, she said, because if I had responded in anger, I would have become just like them, reacting before understanding what I was up against. What I regret are the missed chances. The talent was ignored because it didn't dress the part. The voices were disregarded because they weren't loud enough. She looked around, no blame, no names. But everyone in that room understood they had lived through a storm, not to be destroyed, but to be awakened. That afternoon, Claire left the building like she did every day. No media team followed. No press release was issued. She exited the elevator, walking across the lobby, once a space reserved for titled personnel. This time, no one looked away. A group of junior employees stood up when they saw her. An intern stepped forward and bowed slightly. A compliance staffer, the one who had once called her temp support, watched silently and bowed his head. No one was told to do it. They did it on their own. Not because Claire was the CEO's wife, but because they finally understood dignity doesn't come from a title. It comes from how you treat someone when you believe they hold no power. As she opened her car door, Ethan stepped out to see her off. You've taught them more than any leadership seminar I've ever given, he said. Claire just smiled, softly, as if everything had finally landed in its right place. No one needs to teach them, she said. They just needed to see themselves. When there was no one left to hide behind, the car pulled away from Hale Dynamics headquarters. Behind it, a system slowly restructured, not through software, but through mindset. And at its center was a woman who had once been treated as invisible, now standing as the model of how a culture can be repaired, with silence, delivered at just the right time. Have you ever been judged for the way you dress, for speaking too softly, for not sitting in the right seat, for not looking like someone worth listening to? Claire's story isn't rare. She is the face of millions, people who've been overlooked, dismissed, or labeled as the intern, the temp, the housewife who wandered into the wrong room, in places they were quietly holding together. Maybe you've been that person. Maybe you've seen that person and chose to look away. Or maybe you've laughed at a joke like Nathan's, or interrupted someone like Emma did, without realizing you just dropped the most important thing in the room: dignity. Claire didn't need to fight to be seen. She just let them show who they really were when they thought she was no one. And that's when the truth revealed itself. If you've ever been underestimated because of your appearance, if you've ever been dismissed in your own even when you were the one keeping the whole system from falling apart, if you've ever chosen silence because you knew words would only be heard if they came from the right title, drop a comment below. We want to hear your story because this isn't just about Claire. It's about all of us. Those of us trying to stay steady in a world that rushes to label everything before it understands anything. If something in this story made you stop and think, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever been excluded from the room just because they didn't look important. Because sometimes the person you overlook, it is the one holding the key to changing the entire game. See you in the next video.